For the longest time, we've pictured cybersecurity like this giant fortress, with the IT department as the dedicated guards. But let's be real, in today's world, that model is just broken. What we're going to talk about today is how to shift security from being one team's problem to everyone's shared mission. So picture this. A security breach happens. What's the first thing that goes through everyone's mind? Yup. Where does the finger point? Almost always, it goes straight to the security team. But that whole blame game, it's really just a sign of a much, much bigger problem. So, here's the real issue. When security is seen as only one team's job, you get these huge gaps. Other departments like HR, finance, or legal, they might not even realize that their everyday actions have a massive impact. And those gaps, well, that's exactly where things slip through the cracks. So, how do we fix this? Well, there's a big idea called the shared accountability model. And what that really means is, it's a whole new way of thinking. It's not about just helping out the IT team. No, it's about changing the culture so that every single department knows their role and actually owns their piece of protecting the company. Okay, that all sounds great, but how do you actually do it? How do you make it real? That's where this accountability playbook comes in. Think of it as a simple four-step framework that we're going to walk through right now. It really boils down to four key things. First, you figure out who does what. Then, you write down the rules. After that, you track how you're doing. And finally, you actually encourage the right behavior. Simple, right? Let's break each one down.
All right, step one. This is all about getting organized. I mean, look, you can't have accountability if nobody knows who's supposed to be doing what. It's just chaos. So the very first move is to clearly define who is responsible for what across the entire company, not just in the IT department.
And here's a tool that makes this super practical, a RACI chart. It stands for responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. So for an incident, the IT security team is responsible for doing the work, but the legal team is ultimately accountable for the outcome. See the difference? This little chart gets rid of that whole, "Oh, I thought you were handling that mess," that leads to so many problems. It just wipes out all the guesswork. Okay, so once you know who's doing what, you've got to make it official. That's step two, writing it all down in clear, official policies. And listen, this isn't about creating a bunch of red tape. It's about creating one single rulebook that everybody can actually follow. And we're talking about real-world stuff here. Things like, how do we handle sensitive data? Who gets access to critical systems and who doesn't? What are the security rules for remote work? The key here is to make these policies genuinely useful and not just some document that gathers dust on a shelf. All right, step three. You know the saying, you can't manage what you don't measure? And it is absolutely true here. This is where you bring it all to life with data. We're talking dashboards, regular check-ins, things that show you what's actually happening. You can see which teams are nailing it and, which ones might need a little extra help. This is what turns accountability from just a nice idea into a real number you can point to. And that brings us to the final piece of the puzzle. Step four, actually motivating people. Because let's be honest, if you really want folks to care about security, it needs to matter to them personally. So you can tie security goals to performance reviews, you could give shout-outs to teams that are doing a great job, or hey, even make training fun with a bit of gamification. Okay, so that's the playbook. But what does this look like in the real world, day to day? Let's check out what this shared accountability really means for a few different departments. Let's start with HR. You might not think of them as a security team, but they are absolutely on the front lines. They're the ones managing who comes into the company and, just as importantly, who leaves, and making sure their access is cut off properly. Plus, they're in charge of security awareness training, making sure everyone knows how to spot a threat. Now, what about finance? Well, they're basically the guardians of the company's money and sensitive financial data. Their job is to enforce super important rules, like making sure no one person has too much power in the financial systems. They're the gatekeepers, deciding who gets to see and touch that critical information. And then you have your engineering teams. This is where security really shifts from being reactive to proactive. Instead of just fixing security bugs after they're found, they're responsible for building security in from the very beginning. They own it, making sure every product is secure by design right from that first line of code. Okay, so you've done all this work. You've rolled out the playbook. How do you know if it's actually working? Because the real goal here isn't just to put out fires faster. The goal is to stop the fires from starting in the first place, to build a truly proactive security culture. Let's talk about how you can measure that journey. It all starts with tracking some key numbers, what we call KPIs. For example, a super simple one is just looking at the percentage of employees who've finished their security training for the year. Seeing 85% is great, but it also tells you, crystal clear, that you've got a 15% gap you need to work on. And you can really think about this as a maturity journey. Most companies, honestly, start out in that initial stage where everyone thinks security is just IT's problem. Then, as you start mapping out who owns what, you move into the developing phase. But the end goal, the place you want to be, is that mature stage. That's where accountability is just baked into the company culture, it's tracked, and everyone, all the way up to the top, gets it. All right, let's wrap this all up. We've gone through the playbook, we've seen it in action. But why does all this matter? Why is it so important to move security from being just a checkbox on a list to being a real part of the company culture? Well, it's about so much more than just stopping breaches. I think the best way to picture it is like a giant puzzle. Your IT and security teams, they might have the corner and edge pieces, they build the frame. But every other department, HR, finance, legal, engineering, they all hold critical pieces in the middle. And that complete picture of security only comes together when every single person puts their piece in the right spot. And that really gets to the heart of it. This isn't just about satisfying an auditor or taking a box on some compliance form. True accountability is a culture shift. It's when security becomes a shared value, something that makes the entire company stronger. So, the question I want to leave you with is this. In your company, is security just a checkbox? Is it something you have to do? Or is it really part of your culture? Is it something everyone owns together? Because the answer to that question, that's what really determines how resilient you are.